Have you ever stopped to think why we feel this almost desperate need to prove others wrong about us? Why is it that when someone laughs at our dream, mocks our idea, or simply doesn't believe in what we're building, our first reaction is to shout to the whole world that we're going to succeed? It's as if we need their validation to keep breathing. But let me tell you a story that will turn all that upside down. A story about a woman named Marina who learned in the most brutal way possible that there's a huge difference between trying to prove others wrong and simply proving yourself right. And that difference, my friend, changes absolutely everything. Marina was 28 when she decided to leave her stable job as a marketing manager at a multinational company to start her own digital consulting firm. It sounds like a beautiful dream, doesn't it? The kind of thing we see in blockbuster movies, where the protagonist drops everything, faces challenges, and ends up swimming in money and personal fulfillment. But the reality is quite different from the Hollywood script. When Marina announced her decision at a family dinner, the silence that fell over the table was deafening. Her father, a retired engineer who worked for 40 years at the same company, looked at her with that expression that mixed disappointment and concern. Her mother simply shook her head, and her older brother, always the most direct in the family, let out a dry laugh before telling her she was throwing away years of education and experience of fantasy of being an Instagram entrepreneur. But it wasn't just family. Her college friends, those with whom she'd shared so many dreams and plans during years of study, reacted with barely concealed skepticism. Some were polite enough to wish her well. But Marina could see in their eyes a silent certainty that she was making a colossal mistake. Her co-workers were even more cruel. When she quit, gossip began to spread to the halls like wildfire. They said she'd had a breakdown, that she was going through a premature midlife crisis, that in 6 months she'd be back begging for a job. One colleague in particular, Raphael, who had always harbored a veiled rivalry with her, made a point of loudly commenting during the farewell happy hour that the consulting market was saturated and that she had no chance of standing out. Now, here's where the story gets interesting. Marina's first reaction was exactly what you'd probably do. She became obsessed with proving them all wrong. She created profiles on every social media platform possible, posting 3 times a day about entrepreneurship, success mindset, and motivational quotes with images of lions and eagles. Every client she landed, even the smallest ones, became giant posts celebrating her victories. She tagged former co-workers in her posts and sent subtle messages to friends showing them how successful she was. It was as if every action she took in the business was calculated not to grow the company, but to rub everyone's face in the fact that they were wrong about her. And you know what happened? Absolutely nothing. I mean, some things happened, but nothing she really wanted. She landed a few clients, yes, but they were always small projects, one-off jobs that didn't lead to anything bigger. Her revenue barely covered basic expenses. 3 months after opening the company, Marina was exhausted, frustrated, and starting to believe that maybe everyone was right. Maybe she really didn't have what it took. Maybe it would be better to backtrack, apologize, admit defeat, and look for another corporate job. It was a Tuesday morning, after losing a major bid to a larger competitor, that Marina had her meltdown. She was sitting in the small office she rented, staring at the ceiling, when her cell phone rang. It was Daniela, a former college professor who had become an informal mentor over the years. Daniela had built and sold 3 technology companies, and now dedicated her time to mentoring young entrepreneurs. Marina didn't want to answer. She didn't want to hear another motivational speech about perseverance and overcoming obstacles. But she answered anyway, perhaps out of politeness, perhaps out of desperation. The conversation began as Marina expected. Daniela asked how things were going, and Marina tried to maintain her composure, gave vague, optimistic answers. But Daniela was no fool. She could hear the tension in Marina's voice through the phone. Then she asked a question that changed everything. She asked why Marina was really doing this, why she had started the company. And before Marina could respond with her rehearsed answer about passion and purpose, Daniela was more specific. She asked if Marina was trying to build something meaningful, or if she was just trying to prove a point, if she was playing chess, or if she was just flipping the board because someone said she didn't know how to play. The silence that followed was heavy. Marina realized in that moment that she had spent the last 3 months obsessing over the wrong people. Every decision, every social media post, every client she pursued was filtered through the lens of how it would make others see her. She wasn't building a company. She was building revenge. And revenge, as satisfying as it may seem in theory, is a terrible fuel for any long journey. It burns quickly, leaves a bitter taste, and in the end, you realize you've traveled miles in the wrong direction. Daniela then shared something she'd learned from her own business struggles. She said there's a fundamental difference between trying to prove others wrong and proving yourself right. When you try to prove others wrong, your entire focus is on them. You measure your success by their reaction. You celebrate when they hear about your victories. You get frustrated when they don't recognize your progress. Your moral and professional compass always points toward other people's opinions. But when you focus on proving yourself right, when all your energy is channeled into validating your own vision, into building something solid regardless of who's watching, everything changes. You stop posting on social media to impress and start working in silence. You stop chasing clients who will generate ratings and start seeking clients who will generate results. You stop measuring success in likes and comments and start measuring it in revenue, growth, and real impact. Marina hung up the phone that day with tears in her eyes. But for the first time in months, they weren't tears of frustration. They were tears of clarity. She opened her laptop and did something that seemed crazy at the time. She temporarily deactivated all her personal social media accounts. She stopped posting about the company. She stopped trying to create this public narrative of success. And she started working for real. She started asking different questions. Instead of asking what kind of client would make others wow, she asked what kind of client she could truly help in an extraordinary way. Instead of thinking about how to expand quickly to demonstrate growth, she thought about how to deepen the value she delivered. Instead of trying to be everywhere at once, she chose a specific niche and dove in. The next 24 hours were transformative, but not in the way you're probably imagining. There was no sudden miracle. No million-dollar client appeared out of nowhere. There was no cinematic moment where everything aligned perfectly. What happened was much more subtle and, paradoxically, much more powerful. Marina worked. She didn't work for an audience. She worked to solve real problems. She identified 3 mid-sized companies in the online education sector, a niche she knew deeply from her previous experience, and crafted detailed, personalized proposals. These weren't the generic templates she'd been using. These were in-depth analyses, identifying specific problems these companies had and proposing concrete solutions. Each one took hours to complete. There was no guarantee of return. But for the first time, Marina wasn't concerned with guarantees. She was concerned with excellence. She sent out proposals without fanfare, without posting about the process, without letting anyone know what she was doing. And then she kept working. She revised her entire pricing approach. She realized she'd been charging too little. Not because she needed to compete on price, but because she subconsciously didn't believe she was worth more. This wasn't about the market. It was about herself. She restructured her service packages, focusing on value delivered rather than hours worked. She created presentation materials that weren't pretty for the sake of being pretty, but that communicated clarity and competence. Every detail was designed not to impress, but to be useful. When the clock struck 24 hours after a conversation with Daniela, Marina was exhausted, but it was a different kind of exhaustion. It was the exhaustion of someone who worked on something that matters, not the exhaustion of someone who spent the day trying to convince others that they were working. She closed her laptop, made some tea, and went to bed early for the first time in months. She didn't check her emails. She didn't check if anyone had seen her old posts. She simply slept, and when she woke up the next morning, she had 3 emails in her inbox. 2 were from the companies she had sent proposals to. They wanted to schedule meetings. The 3rd was from a completely unexpected source. It was a referral. One of the companies she had prospected had forwarded her proposal to another company in the same group, which was looking for exactly the kind of solution Marina offered. Now, you might be thinking this is a part of the story where everything turns into a corporate fairy tale, where Marina lands million-dollar contracts, her company explodes, and she lives happily ever after proving everyone wrong. But the truth is more interesting than that, because what happened to Marina in the following weeks and months wasn't simply financial growth. It was a complete transformation of mindset. She did land contracts. She landed good clients who paid well and valued her work. But most importantly, she completely stopped caring about the opinions of those who doubted her. It wasn't an overnight process. There were times when the temptation to post about her victories on social media was almost irresistible. Moments when she wanted to text Raphael, the former colleague who mocked her, just to rub it in his face that she was succeeding. But whenever she felt this temptation, Marina asked herself a simple question Daniela had taught her. Is this action bringing me closer to my goal, or is it just feeding my ego? And more often than not, the honest answer was that it was feeding my ego, so she didn't do it. The interesting thing is that the less Marina tried to prove anything to others, the more people began to notice. Her clients began recommending her not because she had a massive social media presence, but because she delivered extraordinary results. Other entrepreneurs in the field began reaching out to her, asking how she had built such a solid client base so quickly. And Marina's answer was always the same, and always a little disappointing to those who asked, because she didn't have any magic hacks, no secret marketing strategies. She had simply stopped trying to impress people and started solving real problems. 6 months after that conversation with Daniela, Marina was invited to speak at an entrepreneurship event. It was a small event, nothing grand, but it had some well-known figures in the field. And guess who was in the audience? Raphael, the same Raphael who had mocked her at the farewell happy hour. Marina saw him as soon as she took the stage. For a second, she felt that familiar pang of wanting to use that moment for revenge, to rub everything she had achieved in his face. But then she took a deep breath and did something completely different. She simply ignored him, not rudely or deliberately. She genuinely didn't let his presence affect her presentation in any way. She spoke about her journey with brutal honesty. She didn't hide her mistakes. She didn't paint a rosy picture. She shared exactly how she had wasted 3 months of her life trying to prove a point instead of building a business. She talked about how she had been so obsessed with external validation that she nearly destroyed her own company before it even took off. And she explained the fundamental difference she learned between trying to prove others wrong versus proving yourself right. The talk didn't go viral. It didn't have millions of views. But the people who were there, including some important potential clients, connected with the message in a profound way. After the talk, Raphael approached her. Marina didn't know what to expect. An apology? An attempt at networking? But what he said was unexpected. He admitted he'd mocked her because he was afraid. Afraid to take risks, afraid to step out of his comfort zone, afraid of not being good enough. Seeing someone having the courage to do what he did was uncomfortable, so he tried to diminish Marina's dreams to feel better about his own choices. It wasn't a grand apology or a dramatic moment of reconciliation. It was just raw honesty. And Marina realized something important in that moment. If she'd spent the last 6 months focused on proving Raphael wrong, this moment would have been the culmination of the journey. It would be the validation she'd been seeking. But now, with everything she'd built, with the clarity she'd gained, this moment was just another moment. Not unimportant, but definitely not the goal. Now let me pause the story for a second to ask you some uncomfortable questions. How many decisions in your life are you making based on what others will think? How many dreams are you pursuing not because you truly believe in them, but because you want to prove something to someone? How many times have you posted something on social media not because it was important to you, but because you wanted specific people to see it? How many conversations have you had where you spent more time defending your choices than explaining your vision? If you're being honest with yourself, there are probably more than you'd like to admit. And that's okay. That's human. We are social creatures. We care about what others think. The problem isn't that we care. The problem is when it becomes the driving force behind all our decisions. Marina's story illustrates a profound psychological principle supported by decades of research on motivation and performance. When your primary motivation is external, when you're doing something primarily to gain recognition, validation, or to prove something to others, you're building on an extremely fragile foundation, because external motivation is inherently inconsistent. It depends on factors you can't control. It depends on people paying attention. It depends on them reacting the way you want. And when they inevitably don't, when your achievements are ignored or minimized, you crumble. Not because you failed, but because your measure of success was in the wrong hands. On the other hand, when your motivation is intrinsic, when you're doing something because you genuinely believe in it, because you want to prove yourself capable, because you want to see what you can achieve when you give it your all, you're building on solid rock. Your perseverance doesn't depend on applause. Your effort doesn't wane when no one's watching. Your progress isn't measured in reactions and comments, but in skills developed, problem solved, value created. And ironically, it's precisely when you stop chasing external validation that it begins to appear naturally. Because people can sense authenticity. They can tell when someone is truly doing something versus just performing. Let's dive deeper into this because this principle applies to absolutely everything in life. Relationships, career, health, hobbies, literally any area where you're trying to grow or improve. Think about relationships for a second. How many people do you know who enter relationships trying to prove to an ex that they can be with someone better? Or trying to prove to their friends that they're desirable? These relationships almost always fail because they're not built on genuine connection. They're built on insecurity disguised as trust. The person isn't truly getting to know their partner. They're using their partner as a trophy in a competition no one else is playing. Now, think about someone who enters a relationship because they genuinely like the person, because they see potential for mutual growth, because they want to build something meaningful together. This relationship has a much greater chance of thriving because the foundation is solid. The motivation is internal. The focus is on creating something real, not on performing happiness for others. The same principle applies to a career. If you're pursuing a position or a company because you want to finally make your parents proud of you, or because you want to show your classmates that you're successful, you'll probably feel empty even if you get it, because getting the position doesn't resolve the emotional wound you were trying to heal. But if you pursue a career because you're genuinely passionate about the work, because you want to develop expertise, because you want to contribute meaningfully, you find satisfaction in the process, not just the outcome. Marina understood this the hard way. She had to face it, waste time, and almost give up on her dream before realizing she was playing the wrong game. But most people never have that moment of clarity. Most spend their entire lives chasing validation from people who don't even care that much, wasting energy trying to prove points in arguments that don't matter, measuring success with superficial metrics that don't bring real satisfaction. And in the end, they look back and wonder why, despite all their achievements, they still feel empty. So how do you make the change? How do you stop trying to prove others wrong and start proving yourself right? The first step is brutally honest and uncomfortable. You need to identify which areas of your life are motivated by external validation. This requires a deep self-analysis that most people avoid because it's painful. You have to ask yourself the hard questions. Why do you really want that car? Is it because it will make your life easier in some concrete way? Or because you want the neighbors to see it? Why do you want that promotion? Is it because the job better aligns with your passions? Or because the title looks better on LinkedIn? Why do you post so much on social media? Is it because you genuinely want to share something valuable? Or because you need the validation of likes? These questions are uncomfortable because an honest answer often reveals motivations we don't like to admit. But until you face these truths, you can't change direction. Marina was only able to make the transformation after Daniela forced her to confront the reality that she was building the company for the wrong reasons. Before that moment, she would have sworn she was doing everything right, that she was focused, that she knew what she wanted. But deep down, every decision was being filtered by the fear of public failure and the desire for validation. The second step is to define your own success metrics. And when I say your own, I'm not talking about metrics you think you should use or metrics that make sense to others. I'm talking about metrics that genuinely reflect what you value. Marina realized she had been measuring success by number of followers, reactions from former colleagues, appearances of prosperity. When she redefined her metrics to focus on client quality, value delivered, and developing expertise, everything changed. She had a true north to follow that didn't depend on anyone else to validate. For you, these metrics might be completely different. If you're trying to get in shape, the real metric might not be how much weight you've lost or how you look in photos, but rather how you feel, how much energy you have, what new things you can do physically. If you're trying to build a business, the real metric might not be how many followers you have or how many times you've been mentioned in the media, but rather how many clients you've meaningfully helped, what problem you've solved that wasn't a solution before, how much you've grown as a professional and a person. The third step is the hardest of all and where most people get stuck. You need to develop the discipline to act without an audience. This means doing the work even when no one is watching, praising, or validating. It means making the right decision, even when no one will know. It means maintaining your standards, even when you could relax without visible consequences. This goes against everything modern social media culture has taught us. We've been conditioned to believe that if something isn't documented and shared, it didn't really happen. That value without recognition isn't really value. But this is a lie that traps us in a vicious cycle of constant validation seeking. Marina practiced this deliberately. She deactivated social media, not forever, but long enough to break the habit of constant validation. She began working on projects no one would know about until they were complete. She developed skills that weren't sexy or shareable, but that made her better at what she did. She made difficult calls, wrote complex proposals, studied the market, all in silence. And she discovered something liberating. The work itself began to be the reward, not the recognition of the work, but the very act of doing something well, of solving a complex problem, of growing a little each day. The fourth step is learning to silence external voices without becoming arrogant or closed to feedback. There's a fine line here that many people misunderstand. When you stop seeking external validation, it doesn't mean you become immune to criticism or stop listening to advice. It means you develop a robust internal filter. You can listen to feedback, consider its validity based on its source and substance, and then consciously decide what to do with that information. You don't automatically react to every criticism by trying to prove it wrong, but neither do you accept every criticism as absolute truth. Marina developed this through a deliberate process. She identified 3 or 4 people she deeply trusted, people who had relevant experience and who genuinely cared about her success. These were the people whose feedback she took seriously. Everyone outside this circle had their opinions reduced to noise, not disrespectfully, but simply recognizing that you can't give equal weight to all voices, or you'll drive yourself crazy trying to please everyone. Her father still had opinions about how she should run the business. Her brother still made occasional cynical comments. Former colleagues still speculated. But these things simply lost their power because they weren't among the criteria she defined as important. The fifth and perhaps most important step is recognizing that this change isn't a one-time event, but an ongoing process. You don't wake up one day completely free of the need for external validation. It's a daily practice, sometimes moment by moment, of consciously choosing where you place your focus and energy. Marina still had relapses. There were days where she found herself compulsively checking to see if anyone had commented on something related to her company. There were moments where the temptation to post about an important client was almost irresistible. There were meetings where she almost spent the entire time trying to impress instead of listening. But the difference is that now she recognized these moments for what they were. She recognized the old pattern trying to resurface and made a conscious choice not to follow it. 6 months later became a year. 1 year became 2. And Marina built something that went far beyond what she imagined at that family dinner, where everyone laughed at her dream. She didn't build the largest consulting firm in the country. She didn't become a billionaire. She didn't have the kind of success that makes magazines. But she built something infinitely more valuable. She built a company that reflected her values, that solved real problems, that gave her freedom and fulfillment. She built professional relationships based on mutual respect, not self-promotion. She developed genuine expertise that people sought not because she shouted about it, but because she consistently demonstrated it. And perhaps most importantly, she built a healthy relationship with herself, where her self-esteem didn't depend on likes, comments, or the opinions of people who didn't even really know her. The ultimate irony of Marina's story is that the people who doubted her most in the beginning eventually turned around, not because she proved them wrong, but simply because it was impossible to ignore what she had built. Her father eventually apologized for his initial lack of support and admitted he had projected his own fears onto her decision. Her mother began recommending Marina's company to acquaintances. Her brother even asked for advice on how to manage his own stalled career. And Raphael? He ended up leaving the same multinational 2 years later, frustrated and exhausted, and discreetly asked Marina if she had room on her team. Marina hired him, not as subtle revenge or to rub it in. She hired him because he had skills that complemented the team and because he had genuinely learned humility through his own failures. But here's the part you need to understand. None of these twists and turns were the goal. None of them were the point. If Marina had waited for these validations, these vindications, she would never have built anything real. She wasn't trying to prove anything to them. She was proving something to herself. And in the process of doing so, of relentlessly focusing on building something of value, of improving a little each day, of maintaining high standards even when no one was looking, she became the version of herself capable of building something meaningful. So what's the underlying message of this whole story? It's simple in theory, brutally difficult in practice. Stop trying to prove them wrong. Start proving yourself right. Not to them, to yourself. The difference seems subtle, almost semantic, but it's absolutely transformative. When you try to prove others wrong, you give them power over your journey. They become the arbiter of your success. Their opinions become more important than your vision. And you get stuck in an endless cycle of seeking validation that never fully satisfies. Because no matter how much you achieve, there will always be someone doubting you, always someone downplaying you, always someone telling you were lucky or that you're not that impressive. But when you focus on proving yourself right, when all your energy is directed toward validating your own vision through consistent action and tangible results, you become unstoppable. Not because you become invincible or because you never fail, but because your sense of direction doesn't depend on external approval. You know where you're going. You know why you're going. And you know that every step you take, even the ones no one sees, is bringing you closer to what you want to build. Now, let me tell you what happened to Marina 3 years after that life-changing conversation with Daniela, because this part of the story is rarely told, but it's perhaps the most important. Marina was at an international digital marketing conference in Lisbon. She'd been invited not to speak, but to participate in a panel on strategic consulting. It wasn't the most glamorous or prestigious event, but it brought together serious professionals who truly understood the subject. During the coffee break, a young woman of about 23 approached her with that look in her eyes that Marina recognized immediately. It was a look of someone at the beginning of a journey, full of dreams and terrified by doubts. The young woman, whose name was Beatriz, said she had just graduated in advertising and was considering opening her own agency instead of accepting the job offer she'd received. But everyone around her was telling her it was crazy, that she needed experience first, that the market was too tough for beginners. Beatriz asked Marina how she'd found the courage to take the leap despite all the negative voices. And Marina, instead of giving the expected motivational answer about following her dreams and not giving up, told the complete truth. She talked about how she'd wasted months trying to prove something to others instead of building something real. She talked about her bruised ego, her obsession with validation, how she'd almost destroyed everything before learning the fundamental lesson. Beatriz listened attentively and then asked a question that changed something in Marina. She asked if Marina felt she had wasted those first 3 months of mistakes, if she regretted not having learned her lesson sooner. And Marina realized something she had never clearly articulated before. Those 3 months were not wasted. They were necessary. Because you can't truly understand the difference between proving others wrong and proving yourself right until you've lived both sides. You need to experience firsthand how exhausting and empty it is to chase external validation to truly appreciate the freedom of internal motivation. Those months were the price of the most valuable lesson she'd ever learned. But here's what Marina didn't tell Beatriz at that moment, because she was still processing it. She realized that the journey never truly ends. There's no point where you finally arrive and are completely free of the need for external validation. It's a constant practice, a continual vigilance over your own motivations. Even after 3 years, Marina still occasionally caught herself making decisions based on what others would think. The difference is that now she recognized it more quickly and corrected course. She had developed what psychologists call metacognition, the ability to observe one's own thoughts and patterns. Let's pause again and delve deeper into this idea of metacognition, because it's absolutely crucial. Most people live on emotional autopilot. They feel something and immediately react to that feeling without questioning where it comes from or whether it's valid. Someone mocks your dream, and you immediately feel angry and need to prove something. You post something on social media and don't get the reaction you expected, and you immediately feel anxious and start to question your worth. Someone compliments you, and you feel a rush of validation that feels so good you become addicted to seeking more. These are all automatic responses that you don't even consciously choose. But when you develop metacognition, you create a space between the stimulus and your response. You feel anger when someone mocks your dream, but instead of immediately reacting, you observe that anger. Where does it come from? Is it because you're truly committed to the dream, or is it because your ego has been hurt? Does the mocker truly have relevant authority or experience, or are they speaking from their own insecurities? This distinction is everything, because when you can observe your reactions instead of being dominated by them, you regain control over your life. Marina developed this through a simple but rigorous practice. Every day before bed, she spent 10 minutes reviewing the important decisions she had made that day and asking why she had made each choice. It wasn't self-flagellation. It was honest inquiry. Did she accept that client because she could genuinely add value, or because their name would impress other clients? Did she spend time refining that proposal because she wanted it to be excellent, or because she wanted to publicize the process? Did she turn down that project because it wasn't strategic, or because she was afraid of failing publicly? At first, the answers were uncomfortable. She constantly discovered that her motivations weren't as pure as she'd like to believe. But over time, this habit of self-observation began to happen in real time. She caught herself in the act of seeking validation and was able to make a different choice. And here's something fascinating that high-performance research consistently demonstrates. The most successful people in any field aren't necessarily the most talented or the most intelligent. They're the ones who have developed this capacity for self-regulation and intrinsic motivation. They're the ones who can do the hard work even when they don't have an audience, even when they don't have immediate recognition, even when it would be easier to give up. And the reason they can do this is because they're not relying on external fuel. They build an internal engine that generates its own energy. Think of the great athletes, the revolutionary artists, the paradigm-shifting scientists, the entrepreneurs who built lasting empires. What they all have in common isn't that they were never criticized or doubted. It's that they didn't let that criticism define their journey. Michael Jordan was cut from his high school basketball team. J.K. Rowling was rejected by dozens of publishers. Steve Jobs was literally thrown out of the very company he founded. But none of them spent the following years trying to prove their critics wrong. They spent those years obsessed with proving themselves right, with validating their vision through tireless work and constant improvement. And when you study these stories deeply, you discover something more. Many of them even appreciate the criticism and rejection in retrospect, not in a false or performative way, but genuinely, because those experiences acted as filters. They separated the people who were doing something because they wanted to be famous or admired from the people who were doing it because they couldn't help but do it. If you give up because someone doubted you, you probably weren't that committed. But if you keep going, if you use doubt as fuel not for revenge but for self-improvement, you discover reserves of determination you didn't even know you had. Marina understood this when she looked back on the company's early years. The people who doubted her unknowingly did her a favor, not because they provided motivation, but because they forced her to confront the fundamental question: why do you really want this? If the answer were superficial, if it were about status or approval, she probably would have given up when it got tough. But when she redefined the answer to be about building something meaningful, about developing expertise, about having autonomy and impact, those motivations were deep enough to sustain her through the tough times. Now, you might be wondering how to apply all of this to your real life, how to transition from trying to prove others wrong to proving yourself right. I'll give you a practical framework that Marina developed and that she eventually began teaching to other entrepreneurs. First, you need to do a thorough audit of your current motivations. Take a sheet of paper and divide it into 2 columns. In the first column, list all the significant goals you're pursuing right now. They could be professional, personal, relationships, health, anything. In the second column, for each goal, honestly write down why you want it. And here's the secret. You need to go beyond the first obvious answer. Keep asking why until you get to the root motivation. For example, let's say your goal is to get a promotion at work. Why? Because you want to make more money. Why? Because you want financial security. Why? Because you grew up watching your parents fight over money and never want to feel that way. Now you've reached a root motivation that's legitimate and deep. Or maybe you keep asking and discover that you want a promotion because you want your older brother to finally respect you. This is also a root motivation, but it's external and probably unsustainable. This exercise is uncomfortable because it reveals truths we'd rather not confront. But until you know exactly why you're doing what you're doing, you can't assess whether you're on the right track. Second step, after identifying your root motivations, you need to separate them into intrinsic and extrinsic ones. Intrinsic motivations come from within: personal growth, autonomy, mastery of a skill, contributing to something bigger than yourself, living according to your values. Extrinsic motivations depend on external factors: recognition, status, approval from specific people, comparison with others, avoiding judgment. Neither is inherently good or bad, but intrinsic motivations are much more sustainable and satisfying in the long run. Third step, for every goal that is primarily motivated by extrinsic factors, you need to make a conscious choice. Either you redefine the goal to have stronger intrinsic motivation, or you honestly acknowledge that that goal isn't really important to you and let it go. This is liberating. Marina did this with several aspects of the company. She realized she was trying to expand into certain service areas not because it made strategic sense, but because she wanted the company to appear more impressive. When she recognized this, she simply stopped pursuing those expansions. She focused on what she was genuinely good at and passionate about. And paradoxically, the company grew faster after she narrowed her focus. Fourth step, you need to create rituals and systems that reinforce intrinsic motivation and minimize dependence on external validation. For Marina, this meant drastically limiting social media use, especially avoiding posting about work in progress. It meant creating private success metrics that no one else saw. She kept a notebook where she tracked skill development, insights gained, and complex problems solved. These were her true measures of progress, not the number of followers or likes. It also meant establishing a deep work routine where she turned off all notifications and allowed herself to fully immerse herself in important projects without the constant distraction of seeking validation. Fifth step, you need to build an extremely selective inner circle of people whose opinions you genuinely value and who will give you honest feedback. They can't be people who just praise you. They have to be people who challenge you constructively because they want to see you grow. Marina narrowed the circle down to 5 people: Daniela, her mentor, 2 other entrepreneurs who were a few years ahead of her on the journey, an old professor who deeply understood the industry, and, interestingly, a childhood friend who had nothing to do with business but knew her well enough to call out her nonsense. These 5 people were allowed to give unfiltered feedback. Everyone beyond this circle had their opinions politely listened to but not internalized. Sixth step, you need to develop a tolerance to the discomfort of being misunderstood or underestimated. This is perhaps the hardest because it goes against our deepest social instincts. We evolved as a species to care about the group's opinion because in our ancestral environment, being expelled from the tribe meant death. So we have these very strong emotional responses when we feel judged or rejected. But the modern world is different. You won't die because someone doubts you. You won't be exiled because someone mocks your dream. But your primitive brain doesn't know this. So it reacts as if it were a matter of life or death. Marina practiced this deliberately. When someone made a negative comment or doubted her, instead of immediately trying to defend or justify it, she practiced simply listening, thanking them for their perspective, and moving on. At first, this was almost physically painful. Every fiber of her being wanted to argue, explain, prove, but she forced herself to sit with the discomfort, And over time, that intense emotional response began to subside. Negative comments became just data, not personal attacks. She could consider whether there was any useful truth there without feeling devastated. Seventh and final step. You need to practice privately celebrating victories. This seems counterintuitive because we've been conditioned to believe that celebration means sharing publicly, posting, and celebrating. But there's immense power in recognizing and savoring achievements just for yourself. Marina started a ritual where, whenever she reached an important milestone, she took an afternoon off just to reflect. Not to post about it, not to tell anyone, just to sit with herself and truly absorb what she had achieved and how she had grown in the process. These private celebrations were more satisfying than any number of likes or congratulations because they were authentic. There was no performance involved. It was pure recognition of effort and progress. When Marina fully implemented this framework, something interesting happened. She became immune to praise and criticism in the same way she was immune to criticism. Not completely insensitive, but no longer defined by them. When someone praised her work, she genuinely thanked them but didn't let it inflate her ego or create dependency. When someone criticized them, she considered whether the criticism was merited but didn't let it devastate her. She had developed what the ancient Stoics called equanimity, this ability to remain balanced regardless of external circumstances. And here's where the story gets really interesting. Because the moment Marina completely stopped caring about other people's opinions in a performative way and started genuinely caring about the work itself, her reputation exploded. Not because she was trying to build a reputation, but because consistency and excellence over time inevitably attract attention. Clients started seeking her out not because she was aggressively marketing herself, but because other clients couldn't stop talking about the results they achieved working with her. Opportunities started appearing not because she was networking frantically, but because people who did serious work recognized someone else who did serious work. 3.5 years after starting the company, Marina received an email that completely surprised her. It was from a private equity firm interested in acquiring her consulting firm. The amount offered was substantial. Marina had never considered selling. She had never built a company with that in mind. But the proposal was intriguing, not primarily for the money, but for what it represented. It was objective validation that she had built something valuable, not performative validation from people trying to be polite or encouraging, concrete validation from people putting their money where their mouths were. Marina spent weeks thinking about the proposal. She talked to her inner circle, and in the end, she decided not to sell, not because the price was low or because she was too proud, but because she realized there was still so much she wanted to build, so many ways she wanted to grow, so many contributions she wanted to make. The process of considering the sale forced her to articulate something that had been implicit. She genuinely loved the work. She loved solving complex marketing problems. She loved mentoring young professionals. She loved the autonomy and freedom she had created. Selling would mean giving up all that for a number in a bank account. And while the number was attractive, it wasn't worth the trade. This decision was the ultimate test of Marina's journey. Because you only truly know your priorities when you have to make difficult choices. It's easy to say you value autonomy and purpose over money when you don't have a real offer on the table. But when you do, when you have the concrete option to trade one for the other, then you discover what truly matters. Marina discovered that she had built not only a profitable company, but a life she genuinely loved. And that was more valuable than any EBITDA multiple anyone was willing to pay. But the story doesn't end there, because the most powerful thing about Marina's journey wasn't financial or professional success. It was the internal transformation. It was how she related to herself and the world. She had started out as many people do, desperate for approval, measuring her worth by what others thought of her, reacting emotionally to every criticism and compliment. And she became someone fundamentally different, someone who knew her worth regardless of external recognition. Someone who could do the hard work without needing constant applause. Someone who had inner peace not because everything was perfect, but because her self-esteem wasn't dependent on volatile external factors. And this spread to every area of her life. Relationships improved because she no longer needed constant validation from partners and friends. Her health improved because she started exercising for how it made her feel, not to post photos. Hobbies became genuinely enjoyable again because she did them for fun, not content. She had rediscovered something she had lost somewhere between childhood and adulthood: the ability to do things simply because she wanted to, without needing to be witnessed or validated. So when I think about Marina's story, when I reflect on this journey of trying to prove others wrong to prove herself right, I realize it wasn't really about business or career. It was about identity. It was about who defines who you are. And the answer Marina found, the answer that changes everything, is that you define who you are, not through grandiose statements or inspiring posts, but through thousands of small daily choices. By doing the work when no one is watching, by maintaining standards when it would be easier to relax, by acting according to your values, even when it comes at a cost. These choices accumulate, they compound, and eventually, they build a person you can look in the mirror and genuinely respect. Now, let me bring this back to you, because you're not here to hear about Marina. You're here because some part of you knows you're stuck in the same pattern she was. You're trying to prove something to someone. Maybe it's your parents who never believed in you. Maybe it's an ex who underestimated you. Maybe it's colleagues who treat you as inferior. Maybe it's your past self who internalized all these negative voices. But you're tired. You're exhausted from living for an audience. You're frustrated because no matter how much you achieve, it never seems to be enough. And you're starting to suspect that maybe the problem isn't that you're not doing enough, but that you're playing the wrong game. So here's your challenge. It's simple to understand, but brutally difficult to execute. For the next 24 hours, commit to one rule. Don't make any decisions. Don't take any actions based on what others will think. Only act based on what you genuinely believe is right. Sound easy? Try it. Every time you pick up your phone to post something on social media, ask yourself why. Is it because you genuinely have something valuable to share, or because you need validation? Every time you make a decision about what to wear, where to go, what to do, ask yourself if you're choosing based on what you want or what you think will impress others. Every time you feel the urge to defend or justify yourself, ask yourself if it's really necessary or if it's just a bruised ego. 24 hours. A whole day living for yourself, not for an audience. I'm not saying to become selfish or insensitive. I'm saying to reconnect with your authentic motivations beneath all the layers of social conditioning. And at the end of those 24 hours, reflect on how you felt. It will probably be uncomfortable. It will probably feel strange not having that constant stream of external validation. But you will also probably feel something you haven't felt in a long time. You will feel authenticity. You will feel freedom. You will get a glimpse of what it's like to live without constantly performing for an invisible audience. And if those 24 hours resonate, if you feel there's something there worth exploring further, then expand. Try a week, then a month. I'm not saying abandon social media or become a hermit. I'm saying fundamentally change your relationship with external validation. Use social media if it serves a genuine purpose, but don't let it define your worth. Seek feedback from people who matter, but don't let random criticism devastate you. Celebrate victories publicly if it makes sense, but don't rely on it to feel like you've achieved something real. This is the essence of stopping trying to prove others wrong and starting to prove yourself right. It's not about becoming arrogant or closed-minded. It's about developing an internal compass so strong that you can navigate any storm of opinion without losing your way. It's about building a foundation of self-confidence that doesn't depend on likes, comments, or approval from people who don't even really know you. It's about finally breaking free from the exhausting prison of living for audiences and discovering what it's like to build something real simply, because you want to see if you can. And here's the final promise. When you make this shift, when you truly internalize this difference and live it consistently, you don't just build better things. You become a better person, more authentic, more resilient, more fulfilled, because your sense of worth is no longer held hostage by factors beyond your control. You regain power over your own life. And ironically, the people around you begin to respect you more, not because you're trying to earn their respect, but because they can sense you don't need it. And there's something magnetic about someone so secure in their own path that they don't need constant validation. So stop trying to prove them wrong. Start proving yourself right, not through words or posts or dramatic statements, but through consistent action, quiet progress, and an unwavering commitment to your own vision. This is the path. This is how everything changes. And while no one can walk this path for you, while each person has to discover for themselves, now you at least know the path exists. You know it's possible, and you have the map. The rest is up to you. The question is no longer if you can, it's if you will. And that answer is only yours to give, not to me, not to others, but to yourself. So what will it be?